Germany is a country which has had lots of political changes in the last 100 years, going from an empire to the Weimar Republic to being run by Hitler and the Nazi Party to being two countries, one a friend of the West and one a Soviet puppet state, to what they are today, one large, unified, federal Republic of Germany with a functioning parliamentary democracy with many different parties. Traditionally, the main parties of the German political landscape have been the CDU, or Christian Democratic Party, to the right, or the Social Democratic Party, or SPD, to the left. However, since the implementation of mixed-member proportional, none of these parties have ever won an outright majority. So this means that the parties have to form deals or coalitions with smaller parties to elect a chancellor and a cabinet. And there are a few options for smaller parties. There's the FDP, which is a liberal, right-wing, pro-business party, and a natural ally to the CDU, and the Green Party, which is a more typical Green Party and a natural ally to the SPD. Before Chancellor Angela Merkel, most coalitions were only between parties of the right and parties of the left. But that changed in 2005, when Angela Merkel formed a coalition government with her party, the CDU, and the other big party, the SPD. This was due to the rise of a further left-wing party, the Party of Democratic Socialism, or PDS, which was descended from the East German Communist Party, which ran the socialist dictatorship in East Germany before the fall of the Berlin Wall. No party wanted to work with them, so they took up enough seats to cause a real mess. And in her last government after the 2017 election, she was forced to make another grand coalition because the FDP walked out of coalition negotiations and the AfD took up enough seats to cause another mess. All of the German parties have one firm commitment. They will, under no circumstances, work with the Alternative for Deutschland. This is because the AfD is a lot more right-wing than the traditional German right. Well, apart from those guys. They have been accused of having racist and hateful policies. They are the only party in the Bundestag that does not believe in human-caused climate change, and they have gained fame for their opposition to immigration, particularly Muslim immigration, in their country. They are fairly Eurosceptic and believe in other policies more out of the mainstream. Summary, they are very right-wing and nobody wants to work with them. But why is that a problem? Look at the results of the 2021 German election. The SPD won a narrow plurality over the CDU. They then proceeded to form a coalition with the Green Party and the FDP. But since then, the polls have looked worse and worse for the SPD. The SPD is now in third place and at risk of falling to fourth place, with support from the German public only at 15%, neck and neck with the Greens. Ahead of them is the CDU at around 30%, but the AfD has climbed in the polls and now sits at 23%. I must mention a very key detail, however, and that is that some electoral reforms have happened under Chancellor Scholz. The Germans use MMP, meaning that Germans get two votes, a constituency vote, which directly elects a member to the Bundestag, and a party vote, which decides how many seats each party gets. But in most elections, it happens that at least one party wins more seats with the first vote than they deserve under the second one. So for fairness, they would add more seats to the Bundestag so that every party would be equally represented in that situation. There was also a rule that if a party won less than 5% of the party vote, but won 3 constituencies, they would still get full parliamentary representation, but not anymore. Now, the Bundestag is set at 630 members. If a party doesn't win 5% of the party vote, they don't get any seats, even if they win constituencies. And if a party wins over their allocation, some of their members just lose their right to take a seat, decided from lowest vote share until their balance is met. These changes have faced constitutional challenges, which will be interesting to follow, but for the purposes of this video, I will just assume that they are found constitutional. Knowing that, the vote-to-seat ratio from before makes for a weird situation. A grand coalition is not possible, meaning that there would have to be another party, either the Greens or FDP, in the coalition. These coalitions have happened at the state level, but the thing is, Friedrich Merz has often criticized the idea of grand coalitions, even under Merkel. Now maybe he would give in to the pressure, because then the German public could end up blaming him if they were forced into another emergency election. But then again, would it really be a grand coalition if the SPD was in third or fourth place? But why would this be a political crisis? For 2 reasons. 1, it's an awesome video title. 2, prolonged grand coalitions, or anything but AfD coalitions, could cause some instability. The AFD, which is already kind of a protest vote, could just turn into an anti-government vote altogether, increasing their vote share if the governing coalition became unpopular. But that could spell issues for the other parties in the German political landscape. As their vote shares decreased, they could find themselves making the same coalitions over and over again, because that's the only option if they don't want to include the AFD in the government. And that isn't a good thing, since this deal could easily just fall apart if one of the parties gets mad. And when you have three big parties with conflicting agendas, there aren't things that all parties are willing to compromise on, which means that nothing huge really gets done under coalitions like this. Germany's political system has an interesting design though. They don't have the ability to just have one big motion of no confidence, which triggers an election. Instead, they have a system called constructives Misstrauensvotum, or constructive vote of no confidence. This means that to remove the chancellor, they have to have another chancellor lined up who has majority support, and in this scenario where the coalition just falls apart, that probably won't happen. So what are the possibilities from here on out? The first one is just the scenario I have mentioned, which are the giant coalitions which have to work together to form a government for the time being. MERS, no matter what, would likely have to give in to the pressure and have a grand coalition with whatever parties he needed in order to make a government happen. To put it simply, they would have to work together to form an almost unity government to prevent a rise in the influence of the AFD, even if this might not work out in the end. Let's say this doesn't work out and Germany cannot elect a chancellor. Maybe the parties got into a fight and one just leaves the agreement and one join another government. Negotiations can just fail, like they did between the FDP and CDU in the aftermath of the 2017 election. If they can't form a government, the president can call an election on the advice of the Bundestag, which hopefully would resolve the stalemate. This probably means that the parties go to the polls and blame each other and the AFD for things not working out, and convince the public that the AFD is bad and the other parties are bad, and that the only option is supporting them. But the final, and arguably most obvious, but also most controversial, is that the AFD is let out of their cage in some way. Look at what happened in Sweden. The Sweden Democrats, which were controversial for how far right they were, offered external support to a right-wing government in return for some negotiating power. I could see that happening with the AFD and the German right. What would likely happen is a similar agreement, where the AFD doesn't get cabinet positions, but they get their policies legislated in exchange for government support. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys did, please consider leaving a like and subscribing, as that helps me out a lot. But apart from that, have a good rest of your day, and see you.